Boston, the Massachusetts Legislature on Monday passed a $540.3 billion final budget bill to close out fiscal 2018, which ended June 30. For the first time in several years, the state ended the fiscal year with a surplus of nearly $1 billion. Governor Charlie Baker in July made his own proposal for how to spend the money, with a focus on spending on education and particularly school safety. But lawmakers wanted to take time to develop their own proposals. However, as lawmakers delayed for months, State Comptroller Thomas Schack warned that the late budget closeout could hurt the state's financial position. The State House News Service reported last week that Schack said best practice in the industry was to pass a final supplementary budget by August 31, in order to get the state's annual financial report properly finished and independently audited by October 31. The House Ways and Means Committee released the bill from committee on Monday, and both the House and the Senate passed it immediately. This supplemental budget seeks to strike a careful balance between our immediate needs and our long-term stabilization, all within the context of increased revenues which may not be forthcoming in subsequent years, said Senate President Karen Spilka D. Ashland, who led the Senate Ways and Means Committee before becoming Senate President in July. House Speaker Robert DeLeo D. Winthrop said, "This budget invests in key House priorities including gun safety, infrastructure and responding to emergency incidents, while helping to fortify the state's future fiscal health." The budget bill includes $10 million for a relief fund to help cover the costs of assisting victims of the Merrimack Valley gas explosions on Sept. 13. The money will cover costs that the state incurred helping people in Lawrence, Andover and North Andover whose homes were damaged or who lost gas service as a result of the explosions. It includes the cost of paying state personnel overtime, assistance to victims to pay medical bills and living expenses, and costs incurred by the individual municipalities. A small part of Baker's school safety proposal was included, $7.5 million for grants to public schools to improve their safety infrastructure and $7.5 million for schools to hire mental health providers. The money is far less than what Baker had hoped for when he proposed earmarking $72 million to improve school safety. Baker, asked about the bill on Monday, said people in the education field told him that they wanted more help from the state, particularly around hiring mental health counselors and social workers. Our proposal was built around this notion of enhancing and improving access to social workers, and counselors, and mental health workers in schools, because that's what we heard over and over again from the superintendents and from others that they were primarily focused on, Baker said. My hope would be that whatever comes out of this process here will make it possible for us to help local communities make those kinds of investments, because it was very clear to us that that's where they thought the greatest opportunity was. Baker said he also proposed grants to make school buildings safer and money for school resource training, and he continues to believe all of those proposals should be funded. Numerous state agencies would get additional appropriations if the bill is signed into law. The Office of Health and Human Services would receive an additional $135 million to cover Mass Health fee-for-service payments. The Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, which helps individuals with disabilities, would get $10 million to spend on employment assistance. There is $15.6 million in education funding earmarked to help low-income families access child care. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education would get $5 million to provide targeted assistance for failing schools. The Department of Correction would get $9.3 million to hire new officers, and $3.6 million to implement a criminal justice reform bill that passed last year, particularly new requirements related to mental health treatment. The state police would receive $5.8 million for a new state police class, $5.9 million for National Guard fee and tuition waivers, and $3.1 million for its crime lab. The Cannabis Control Commission would get an additional $2.5 million. The final budget bill includes $20 million for the Department of Revenue for underground storage tank reimbursements, which go to clean up oil spills. The bill would put $240 million into the state's rainy day fund, bringing the total fund up over $2 billion. It deposits $63.5 million into various reserve funds, including a sheriff's reserve fund, a fund for collective bargaining agreements, a clean water trust and $5 million to help residents who fled Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands after the hurricanes. Another $81.4 million would be set aside to cover the cost of new collective bargaining agreements. The bill would put $36 million into a transportation trust fund, and $40 million toward Chapter 90 road repair funding. It sets aside $1.5 million to create a new family and medical leave program, under legislation signed last year, and sets up some of the regulations required for that program. It includes $2 million for the operations of the state Senate, and $2.5 million for the Secretary of the Commonwealth to implement early voting in November. The budget bills often include new policy provisions as well. This one creates a $10 million pilot program to prevent gun and violent crime in neighborhoods with high crime rates by providing money to nonprofits that work with young adults ages 17 to 24.